Hello, this is Dr. Paul Cottrell, and we're going to be talking about three videos today. One's going to be what Mark Levin has to say recently, and then there's going to be a video about New York, and then we're going to talk about the crazy stuff that's going on in the world. So let's begin with playing Mark Levin's video. It's titled, "I'm sick and tired of these attacks."
Hello, America. I'm Mark Levin, and this is Life, Liberty, and Levin Saturday. One of the reasons I love doing these shows on Fox is it gives me an opportunity not only to introduce you to some stellar individuals, but to talk about history and philosophy and economics and all these things that are generally not discussed on platforms like this. American history. Maybe I ought to do a show on American history every week. What we're going to use tonight's show, it's going to be very exciting, I think, very informative, to discuss some American history. Why? Because there are reprobates, historical illiterates on other channels who want you to believe certain things that are not true. Why? Well, mostly because they're not very bright. And so, as I said the other day, part of my job here is to unravel what they do. But more importantly, in the next 15 minutes, you're going to learn more about American history than you probably have ever learned, certainly more than you've ever learned on TV or radio, and mostly more than you ever learned in high school or college.
You know, with Amazon, the hardest thing is obviously finding products to sell and then getting authorized to sell those.
We're going to start by using as a foil a reprobate who is a political reporter in Washington, D.C., who appeared on MSNBC, where we all go to get facts and information, don't we? And I want to deal with this because this is a frontal assault on Christianity. We've had a frontal assault on Judaism and Jews for the last many months in this country. It's been given voice by MSNBC and CNN, the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the usual platforms. But now they're pushing this idea of Christian nationalism, which they're trying to link up with the Klan and things of that sort. The media in this country, they abuse their authority, they lie, and they try and preach the radical left agenda. How about we do a little bit of history tonight and straighten things out? So this is from last week, a political reporter on MSNBC, a terrible, poisonous combination. Go.
There's many different groups orbiting Trump, but the thing that unites them as Christian nationalists, not Christians, by the way, because Christian nationalists is very different, is that they believe that our rights as Americans, as all human beings, don't come from any earthly authority. They don't come from Congress. They don't come from the Supreme Court. They come from God. The problem with that is that they are determining men, it is men, are determining what God is telling them. And in the past, that so-called natural law is, it's a pillar of Catholicism. Catholicism, for instance, has been used for good in social justice campaigns.
My understanding of the Constitution, now I'm not a constitutional lawyer. I don't want to be a lawyer. I think lawyers have a tendency to bring down the country because it makes the country more litigious. But my understanding of the Constitution is that we have inalienable rights endowed by our Creator, and that the founding fathers of the Constitution had a certain element of divinity enshrined in the Constitution. And that if we take the stance, and I don't know what Mark Levin's going to say, but if we take the stance that laws are, especially high moral laws, are given by mankind, then you'll be able to justify morality with different philosophical frameworks. And hence, that's what happened in Germany in between World War I and World War II. The justification of an annihilation of people based on a certain philosophical framework. So the wisdom of our founding fathers, that there are rights that are endowed by our creator that cannot be overturned by mankind, is a very powerful concept. What it is that the liberal media wants to tell you that we can just rewrite the Constitution into a system that will erode the civil liberties and usher in a government that is much more socialistic. I would throw it into the category of communistic. They want to try to create some sort of one-party system.
Martin Luther King evoked it in talking about civil rights, but now you have an extremist element of conservative Christians who say that this applies specifically to issues including abortion, gay marriage, and it's going much further than that.
You know, ladies and gentlemen, the sanctimony that the left has when they're spewing stupid things is remarkable to me. Now, obviously, she doesn't know a damn thing about American history or America's founding, other than what she's heard from some left-wing tenured professor or her friends. The founders of this country, the most important philosopher at the time was John Locke. John Locke wrote a number of essays and treatises, including the second treatise on government. This had an enormous impact on the founders of this country. Other historians have looked very carefully at the pamphlets that were written at the time. Thomas Paine was a pamphleteer, but there were many. And John Locke was cited more than any other pamphleteer. And why? John Locke talked about the free will, the individual, unalienable rights, natural law. And in some ways, he was borrowing from Aristotle. Aristotle talked about two characters of the law. He talked about natural law, which is a universal law. In other words, murder is wrong, whether man passes a law or not. It's wrong in America. It's wrong in China. The fact that governments don't follow it and individuals don't follow it is a different story. But morality does not come from man. Morality comes from a higher authority. And then there's what he called particular law. What's particular law? Law made by man. So there's universal truths, universal law, God-given, particular laws created by man. Some are just, some are unjust, some are democratic, some are authoritarian, whatever it is. This is basic stuff for those of us who've studied it over the decades.
Hi, my name is Jules Haas, a New York attorney. For over 30 years, I've represented clients in this.
And the
you can oh, unfortunately it went down to the wrong screen here. Okay, so you can see the ones that are watching the video and not just listening to the audio. This picture of Washington, Adams, and Thomas Jefferson. This painting, actually, my father had in his house. Hanging on the wall. You know, so I've seen this painting, a replica of it, many years, and it's the drafting. It's a scene that is capturing the drafting of the Declaration of Independence, and one of the backstories is that individuals within the movement, the independence movement, wanted Benjamin Franklin to actually write it, not Thomas Jefferson. Benjamin Franklin did not want to write it. Part of the reason why Benjamin Franklin didn't want to write it is because of all the drafts that would have to be made, and people's inputs. So he kind of was more of a behind the scene guy. So Thomas Jefferson ended up penning the Declaration of Independence with the edits of heavily edited by Benjamin Franklin and with input by Adams. So when I see this picture, it kind of reminds me of my father.
Founders of our country during the revolutionary period, when they wrote the Declaration of Independence, what did they rely on? Who did they rely on? They relied on Aristotle. They relied on a great Roman senator by the name of Cicero. They relied on John Locke. They relied on Montesquieu. They relied on a gentleman by the name of Sidney. They relied on all these great thinkers, Aquinas. That's who they relied on. Why? Because really, this is about Western Enlightenment. Western Enlightenment. This is about a nation that was founded on Judeo-Christian principles. And yet we're told every day that it's not. We're told every day that this is an unjust country. We're told every day that it's about white privilege. We're told every day something that's a lie. Well, I would remind them that Karl Marx was white too.
Well, I think what it is, we have a large section of society now trying to destroy God, family, and country. So one of the pillars to destroy country is to try to destroy its constitution, destroy its foundation, destroy its national anthem. So if you have an agenda to try to destroy a country, try to ridicule and erode its constitution and its constitutional freedoms.
Our hero Franklin Roosevelt, he was white too. So is our hero Joe Biden, who's actually translucent, if you want to know the truth. But for instance, Aristotle wrote Nicomachean Ethics. In one of his essays on that, he talks about this. John Locke, the second treatise on government. Virtually every single founder read that book. Sidney on discourses concerning government, Cicero on the Republic and on the laws. And I could go on and on and on. It's all there for the understanding. Where she, Politico, MSNBC, and the bobbleheads that are just saying yes, 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 who do they rely on? They're so moronic, they don't even know who they rely on. You know who they rely on? Philosophers like Rousseau and Hegel. And Marx stole from Hegel. All three white men, by the way, just want to remind the left. And that's the modern day Democrat Party. That man gives us rights and privileges. And we need the right man, certain types of men. So in other words, it's a very dangerous ideology and it's preposterous. Now, I want to talk about the Declaration of Independence that relies on John Locke and Aristotle and those. Follow me carefully. Now we get into a really smart part. If colleges were actually teaching this subject, they should be teaching something like this. Listen to this. Reason cannot by itself explain why there's reason. Science cannot by itself explain why there's science. Man's discovery and application of science are products of reason. Reason and science can explain the existence of matter, but they can't explain why there is matter. They can explain the existence of the universe, but they can't explain why there's a universe. They can explain the existence of nature and the law of physics, but they cannot explain why there is nature and the law of physics. They can explain the existence of life, but they can't explain why there is life. They can explain the existence of consciousness, but they cannot explain why there's consciousness. Science is a critical aspect of human existence, but it cannot address the spiritual and moral nature of man. In this respect, science is a dead end, around which the atheists refuse to reason. Reason itself informs man of his own limitations, and in doing so, directs him to the discovery of a force greater than himself. A supernatural force responsible for the origins of not only human existence, but all existence, and which itself has always existed and will always exist. These are my opinions in Liberty and Tyranny, but they were also the views of the founders of your country.
Stop overpaying for sunglasses. It's crazy that the most expensive thing you're wearing is also the most
For most, the supernatural reveals itself in the Creator, God. Man seeks God's guidance through faith and prayer. The agnostic accepts the supernatural, but is not sure of the form of its existence. The deist accepts that God created the universe and man's condition, but left it to man to sort things out through reason. But man is more than a physical creature. As Edmund Burke, who was at the time a crucially important Irish member of the British Parliament, who looked at the American Revolution and supported it, who looked at the French Revolution and strongly opposed it, because he said the American Revolution was about representative government, the French Revolution was about destroying their society, much like the revolution of the left today. What did he say? There's but one law for all, namely the law which governs all law, the law of our Creator, the law of humanity, justice, equity, the law of nature and of nations. This is the natural law that penetrates man's being, and which the founding fathers, my words, adopted as the principle around which civilized American society would be organized. Your Declaration of Independence, which was the consensus position of the colonists, appeals specifically to the laws of nature and nature's God. It provides further, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's John Locke. The founders were enlightened men, but not purely of the age of enlightenment. They were highly educated, well-informed men who excelled at reason and subscribed to science, but worshiped neither. They comprehended them, their strengths as well as weaknesses. At least two founders, Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin, are widely believed to have been deists. They were men of varying denomination, but united and emphatic in the belief that the Creator was the origin of their existence and the source of their reason. Look, I'm not preaching religion here, although I'm a man of faith. I'm telling you your history, which in a 50-second soundbite is eviscerated, obliterated by a numbskull on MSNBC from Political. Now, deeper. Ready to go deeper with me? Come on, this is fun. Is it possible there is no natural law and man can know moral order and unalienable rights from his own reasoning, unaided by the supernatural or God? There are, of course, those who argue this case, including the atheists and others who attempt to distinguish natural law from divine providence. It is not the view adopted by the founders. This position would, it seems, lead man to arbitrarily create his own morality and rights, or create his own arbitrary morality and rights. Right and wrong, just and unjust, good and bad would be relative concepts susceptible to circumstantial applications. We see it all over the world. We see it all over the world. Moreover, by what justification would life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness be unalienable rights if there is no natural law? Since reason alone cannot make them inviolable, what then is natural law if its origin is unknown or rejected? It is nothing more than a human construct. An individual may benefit from the moral order and unalienable rights around which society functions while rejecting their divine origin, but the civil society cannot organize itself that way. It would become unstable and vulnerable to anarchy and tyranny, imperiling all within it, especially the individual. The abandonment of natural law is the adoption of tyranny in one form or another, because there is no humane or benevolent alternative to natural law. Now, some resist the idea of natural law's relationship to divine providence, for they fear it leads to intolerance, even theocracy. They have it backwards. If man is endowed by the Creator with certain unalienable rights, he's endowed with these rights no matter his religion, or whether he has allegiance to any religion, or whether he believes in God. It is natural law divined by God and discoverable by reason that prescribes the inalienability of the most fundamental and eternal human rights, rights that are not conferred on man by man, and therefore cannot legitimately be denied to man by man. Liberty.
Hi, I'm Dutch Masters of Carnivore Trading, and I love making money trading stocks.
Individual liberty, free will. We don't get that from Congress. We don't get that from the Supreme Court. We don't get that from Marxist dictators or fascists. Where does it come from? Now, people may be atheists, that's fine. They may not believe in God, they may not know what they believe. But this society, this culture was created around the belief that God created these principles. And it is the divine nature of natural law that makes permanent man's right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The last sentence of the Declaration of Independence, the founders proclaimed, and for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Now, one other thing about Christianity, and I say this as a Jew who thanks God every day, that thanks God every day for the benevolence of Christians and their faith. Despite its different denominations, Christianity was and is America's dominant religion. There's no dispute that Judeo-Christian values and traditions have and do influence America's fundamental laws and policies. However, despite its varying practices and applications in the colonies in the early years of the states, Christianity itself does not preach operational dominance over the body politic or seek justification from it, even while it promotes and defends its teaching through proselytism and activism. In contrasting Christianity to, say, Islam, in this respect, Alexis de Tocqueville observed that Muhammad professed to derive from heaven, and he has inserted in the Quran not only a body of religious doctrines, but political maxims, civil and criminal laws, and theories of science. The gospel, the Christian gospel, on the contrary, only speaks of the general relations of men to God and to each other, beyond which it inculcates and imposes no point of faith, which is why we have the First Amendment, the free exercise of religion. It doesn't say the free exercise of Christianity and Christianity only. Long story short, if we follow Politico and MSNBC, we will cease to be a free society. They may not know it, but they're embracing the ideology of tyrants, totalitarians, of Marx, Hegel, and Rousseau, and they are rejecting the entire basis for the American system of government. And they're doing it because they want to trash and smear Christianity. Now, one additional point. I want you to look at something. This is Arlington National Cemetery. I want you to look at Arlington National Cemetery. I want you to look at this. Row after row after row after row. The vast majority of those headstones have a cross on them. Not all of them, the vast majority. The vast majority of the people who've died for this country were buried at Arlington and other military sites are white Christian men. I'm sick and tired of this idea of white privilege, Christian nationalism, the attack on the people who are so responsible for this nation. When you look at Arlington Cemetery, my question to you is this. You think those people there, many of them who died 17, 18, 20, 25, 30 years old, you think they were privileged? You think they were white privileged Christians? They died defending this country, including the First Amendment, natural law, the law of nature, morality, truth, universal truths. And they populated that cemetery like no other group.
Hey, Sean Hannity here.
All right. So, just to wrap up with Levin here, the country, its ethos is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And that there are certain rights that are unalienable or inalienable that cannot and should not be eroded by a politic that we're starting to see emerge from the liberal side. And until Americans start fighting back against wokeism and against this diatribe from the liberal for large swaths of society to be apologetic to certain types of people, there needs to be a pushback. And that pushback is going to be through the pocketbook, right? Your wallet. Don't buy products coming from woke agenda companies. You are seeing that with the boycott with Bud Light. You're seeing that with the boycott of Nike to some extent. So, you know, boycotting the goods and services of companies that are pushing wokeism is a good way to do it. But also when someone tells you to take a knee, you don't take a knee. When you see you're at a baseball game or a football game and they're playing two national anthems, you don't stand for the black national anthem, because this nation, it's one nation under God with liberty and justice for all. It's not two national anthems. It's only one national anthem. So you call out the wokeism. You call out this demonization of people. And when people are starting to talk about this systemic racism and how other groups, other ethnicities are the oppressor, and that another category of another ethnic group is the oppressed, you have to push back and say it's one nation under God with life, liberty, and justice for all. The liberal is trying to divide the country. And until we push back, they will continue to do it. Now what I'm going to play is
when you have auto glass damage, trust SafeLight. In one easy appointment, we can replace your windshield and recalibrate your advanced safety system.
Great, thanks.
Stay safe with SafeLight. Schedule now.
SafeLight repair, SafeLight replace.
The United States.
To be Cash Jordan. This was released about 51 minutes ago. There's another
service built for how you business.
Found living in the basement of a furniture store.
But when city officials finished counting the people inside, they found 74 asylum seekers and then sent them to migrant shelter in the Bronx.
So New York's shelters are full, forcing people to live in illegal apartments all over town. But even though that's shocking, the city is now putting people in illegal apartments of its own.
This is the second time in as many days that authorities have uncovered these illegal migrant shelters.
The FDNY says there was no ventilation. There wasn't any natural light.
I see bikes in the back. That's when I got alarmed. All over the news, you see that these e-bikes are exploding.
When you have situations like what we are facing here, there's some that's going to attempt to exploit it.
We were fine. We were just, doing what we have to do.
He was charging $300 a month per person.
Last week, the city set up what are supposed to be temporary overflow respite sites like this.
And are there showers inside?
No.
7 climate-controlled tents that have recently just been built. Families will have to walk outdoors to use the bathroom. So obviously there's concerns here.
So all over town, you've got these illegal apartments popping up in storefronts and businesses. And that's happening because over 170,000 people have come to New York seeking asylum. And since the city doesn't have any more room to house people, folks are willing to live just about anywhere, even if it's against the law. But what nobody's talking about is how the city's secretly paying slumlords millions to turn illegal buildings into shelters, which could be just as dangerous to the people who move in. And the conditions in some of these places are terrible.
You can see dozens of people in these beds appearing as if they're waking up. Neither the Department of Buildings nor the FDNY are saying who was living in these psych quarters.
So the city's discovered a slew of these places lately. This one had 12 single beds and 14 plus bunk beds. That's 40 people living in a basement storefront. Like this one or this one. Behind that gate, anything could be going on. And if there had been a fire or something, the residents could have been trapped inside. And experts think there could be hundreds of these illegal operations all over town exploiting people.
Breaking news of
authorities raiding another illegal migrant housing setup.
We're told there were 45 beds inside of what was a vacant storefront. According to management from this building, it was broken into and set up for this.
You need to keep in mind, I personally believe that the illegal immigration that's being forced upon Americans is a long-term agenda to weaken the red states, have them flow into the red states, give them asylum, give them citizenship, and then they will vote Democrat. And now you turn a red state into a blue state. I just feel, even though there is corruption on both sides of the aisle in the United States, on the side of for the Republicans and the Democrats, it just seems to me that the Democratic Party will go to no ends of corruption and I'm trying to say this where it's not going to cause a strike on YouTube, but to no ends of changing the political structure within the country to give them power. And that means ballot stuffing and, corruption at all different levels of government that will lead to just a takeover of the cities, the states, and the federal seats. You kind of see this in cities like Detroit. You're starting to see it in cities like New York and Chicago, where there is a infiltration that takes place, a democratic infiltration that takes place, and a corruption that they'll do everything to prevent a Republican candidate from taking hold. And that means giving freebies to the citizens. That means doing nefarious things when it comes to running for office. Maybe even nefarious things when it comes to actually telling the results. It's really astounding on how bad it is getting in the United States.
So it turns out things are even worse at this second storefront. It was broken into. It must have been abandoned or shut down or closed for quite some time. And someone illegally accessed the store, put beds inside, and started charging people. Apparently, there were 60 people inside this second shelter, and residents spotted it because of the large number of e-bikes parked outside. Those batteries can be very dangerous. And the mastermind of this illegal hotel was making bank.
I spoke with the owner of this illegal migrant shelter earlier this afternoon. He confirmed to me that, yes, he was charging $300 a month per person and was making a mint, but said that he...
Wow, so 60 beds, $300 a month each. That's $18,000 in illegal income, and the guy didn't have to pay rent because apparently somebody broke in and set this whole thing up. And what that means is this crisis is giving New York's greediest landlords an opportunity to make money while putting people's lives at risk. But what's crazy is that the city of New York is doing the exact same thing. They're helping owners of property that would be illegal to turn those same properties into housing so they can make money, and it's something nobody's talking about. So this former warehouse, this might look like a nicer place to stay than an illegal basement with 74 other people inside of it. But the choice of this as the city's next shelter is controversial because it might be dangerous. Apparently, the facility itself might be full of pollution, and it's owned by one of the worst landlords in New York City. We're in an industrial part of town, and this is supposed to become a dormitory for over 400 people. This area is not even zoned for residential use. It's all warehouses and former factories, most of which look like they're abandoned. And what nobody's talking about is how the city is taking some of the worst properties available, owned by some of the worst landlords in town and is turning them into shelters which are taxpayer supported, creating sort of a migrant industrial complex, which is exploiting not just the people who live in the properties because they might be dangerous, but also the people who have to pay for them so greedy landlords can get richer. Now, years ago, this facility was used to manufacture fuel gases. But after years of fuel manufacturing, this entire property is polluted. On top of that, we're in one of the most polluted parts of New York City, next to the infamous Gowanus Canal, which for years has been known to be full of toxic chemicals. And this disgusting river is actually an EPA cleanup site. Look at this. No swimming, no fishing. Do not go in here. The EPA has also got air monitoring stations throughout this area just to kind of see what gases are coming out of this thing. Also, this area of town floods when it rains. And the reason that's alarming is because the water out here mixes with rainwater and runs through the streets, flooding apartments and businesses that are away from where this warehouse shelter is going to be located. But now, all of a sudden, the city says it's safe for people to live here, which is weird because 20 years ago, this building's former owner asked the city if they could turn it into apartments, and they were told, no, this building's not safe to be an apartment. But suspiciously, after this building was sold to somebody else, then the city changed their mind. And people want to know, was that an accident or is there something really shady going on here?
I saw war. I saw moving. I saw.
I think that brings up another major issue. And that is even though we're talking about immigration here, immigrants and housing them in New York, there's corruption that's going on, right? And you're going to have people that are in power that can benefit from moving these people into these buildings or getting certain government assistance as a nonprofit to help support some of these immigrants. But there's going to be corruption, or there's going to be people that benefit. So I was, stating in the previous lecture, who are the ones benefiting from the policy? Now, you can take that, extrapolate reparations in the United States, this call for reparations. There's going to be people that benefit, not just the Black community, but the ones that are instituting the policies. There are going to be programs, not just through the check writing, but there are going to be policies on giving better mortgage loans. There are going to be companies or nonprofits that help with securing business loans or helping with getting into better schools at all levels, at the secondary education and primary education for the Black constituency. So there's going to be the individuals that are going to be benefiting from these changed policies under the umbrella of reparations. So you have to look into it. So it would not surprise me that you convince a landlord that was told, in this case, that they couldn't turn it into residential property. They sell it to someone that has connections to the mayor or connections to Schumer or connections to, people that are getting some sort of assistance from the government to help to house these immigrants, illegal aliens. And there's probably a kickback that's taking place. So this is another reason why I'm against reparations. This is that it's going to inevitably cause corruption and a siphoning of American taxpayer dollars to power the powers of implementation of reparations.
So controversially, after this building was sold, the city opened up a $4.5 million contract with a nonprofit to operate a shelter here. And not only did this happen pretty much immediately after the building changed hands, but the city and this shady company had to get around the city's own rules for what could and couldn't be used as a dwelling. So when the wrong person owned this building, nobody could live here. But now that the right person owns it, People can move in. That's definitely not weird or suspicious in any way. But look at this, through this little crack in the paper here, you can see beds on the floor. These look like single beds. So the first loophole the city found was that since we're in an emergency situation because of the asylum crisis, we're allowed to make some exceptions that might be dangerous. And the second loophole is that since the manager of this facility is a nonprofit, safety doesn't matter as much anymore. But the nonprofits.
This is what I mean about the nonprofits benefiting from these policies. This is. Let me give you an example, because I managed a portfolio of Catholic charities for just under 9 years, and I did the budgets and the forecasting, and been at all the financial meetings, and I knew a lot about Catholic Charities of New York, and even the Archdiocese of New York. I know quite a bit about it. They wanted policies to help with DACA, to help with illegal immigration, because there was big money coming from the federal government through Schumer that helped float programs at the nonprofit level. And so a lot of times what happens is that a lot of people don't know this, but nonprofits, they can, some programs are 100% funded, but many are not by grants by the government. All right. So it's around statistically, it's around, depending on the nonprofit, but statistically what I saw was about 80 cents of the dollar needed to help someone. 80 cents was coming from some sort of government funding, and about 20 cents for every dollar that was needed would come from private philanthropy. So the nonprofit is linking federal or state or local government funds with private philanthropy to fund programs. Now, to help pay for some of the staff, they need kind of these situations to be happening in the country, so the nonprofit stays afloat. So, it would not surprise me that there's going to be more of this nonprofit stuff that pops up to try to get federal dollars, and it wouldn't surprise me that there are also kickbacks. Can't prove it, but without further data and further understanding exactly which nonprofit, blah blah blah. But I think there are kickbacks, and then there's obviously this. I'll use the word collusion with the federal government and the nonprofit community to have this problem perpetuate. See, if there are more flowing immigrants in, that means there's probably going to be more money, at least in the short term, flowing in from the federal government into the nonprofit. Increases the chances of kickbacks, corruption, and so there's no real need. There's no real desire to really solve the problem. Now, on the surface, maybe some of these nonprofits have this altruistic, aspect where they're trying to help people. There's a little bit of that going on, but there's also a lot going on when it comes to, there's a crisis, get people into the emotional fallacy phase, and then they'll start donating. You get that private philanthropy that's going, and you create such a political problem that the Federal Reserve, the federal government, will have to give federal funds to these agencies and to these nonprofits to help the problem out, to try to mitigate the political storm. So it's a complex situation, but I would not be surprised that corruption in the nonprofit industry tied to government officials in New York is happening with this crisis.
doesn't own the building. They're renting the building from the person who recently bought it, and they're getting the money to do it from the city. But with those two loopholes, this building went from being totally unsafe to being perfectly livable, and now somebody's going to get rich off of it. And what nobody's talking about is, even though the city says the contract to manage this as a shelter goes through 2026, which is about 3.5 years from now, the lease on the property is actually 9 years, which means that for some reason, city leaders expect the asylum crisis to continue here for quite some time. But apparently the new owner.
And also Chuck Schumer is pushing for 11 million illegal immigrants to get citizenship. Now, with 11 million immigrants being spread across different states, especially red states, you can flip elections, especially at the federal level. We have a body politic in the United States that's close to 50-50. So it's such razor thin margins on many areas of the country that if you stack it with illegal immigrants that, get citizenship, that could push these states into being blue states. And now you are ushering in close to a one-party system. And a one-party system is very similar to communism. And when you have this control of the White House, the House of Representatives, the Senate, and eventually the control of the judicial branch at the lower level of the judicial branch all the way up to the Supreme Court level, you will usher in this totalitarian aspects to this liberal, ultra-liberal agenda. It's the death of the country if this continues on.
Getting all this special treatment just happens to be one of the worst landlords in town with a long history of violations. And apparently their business model is to buy buildings that can become shelters. So they're already part of the homeless industrial complex, and they're profiting off that. And they became the new owners of this facility in June of 2023. Had the old owners held on for just another week or two, they could have got this generous contract from the city to lease out their building and use it as a shelter. If only they had known. Seems like quite a gamble to buy a former polluted factory without the knowledge that it would immediately be able to make you rich. Coincidence? You be the judge of that. But the next place we're headed to is even more controversial than this, because the city was using it as a shelter even though it didn't have proper bathrooms. So this was one of the city's illegal shelters, but the fire department shut it down after they found out what was going on in here. And this happened just a few months ago.
Now there are temporary shelters for asylum seekers until they can be placed in a hotel. But at one site, local immigration advocates say that there's nowhere for them to shower. And are there showers inside?
No.
What are you doing to...
So apparently this place was so poorly suited as a shelter that it did not even have proper bathrooms. People were taking showers in the sinks. That's so sad. Now this building is actually a former college, and the layout inside is what you'd expect: classrooms, hallways. And last year the city was using this building as a quote-unquote respite center for asylum seekers, where they would go and wait for a shelter bed placement at another location. But after opening, it quickly turned into an overnight shelter, which it was never designed to function as, and that's where the problems started occurring. And after people had been living here for months, the fire department inspected this place and kicked everybody out. And that's because it didn't have proper fire safety systems inside. And when the fire department inspects a building, they don't inspect it as a former college and say, okay, it's up to code to be a college. No, if people are living in there, they inspect it as if it's supposed to be an apartment, and that's where the violations come in, and that's what shut this place down. You can even see the vacate order on the door, making it unlawful for people to re-enter this place. The fire systems required for people to be at a desk when they're awake in a classroom setting are not the same fire systems you need for people who are sleeping and are not alert in the middle of the night. And what's crazy is at the time this was happening to the city in multiple areas of town, the city was going all in on the quasi-legal, illegal shelter model. But one by one, the fire department kept shutting them down, and this got so bad bad that the mayor asked the fire department to delay their inspections so that all the shutdowns wouldn't happen so close to each other. But that would have put people's lives at risk because the building's illegal to live in. Now, this particular property's been vacant since October. You can see the date everybody got kicked out right here, right there in ink. Apparently, if the owner wanted to, they could correct the violations and then try to work something out with the city to reuse it. But that's probably not worth doing because the idea of telling people they can live somewhere that doesn't have actual bathrooms, you can't put people in a situation where they're unable to shower. That's just awful. But of course, this is something the property owner knew about at the time it was used by the city. The owners knew their building couldn't possibly be a shelter, but they were willing to make money off New York City putting people's lives at risk inside of this place. And are we also supposed to believe that the city's Department of Homeless Services had no idea this place was illegal either, yet they were still willing to pay money to try and make this place a shelter anyways? And the owner got paid, the asylum seekers got scammed. This is a mess. And what's really alarming is the city didn't have the fire department inspect this place ahead of time. A landlord can't rent you an apartment unless it's been signed off on by the fire department, yet somehow the city was irresponsibly moving people in here without that signature. And after wasting all this money, then the city says, oh, we're broke because of this crisis, but they're wasting money on all kinds of things along the way. But even though the city's other shelters might look livable when compared to this nightmare, they've got other bizarre problems, which also could make them illegal, and people are living in them right now, and the landlords are making millions off of it.
Zillow helped me land this Airbnb listing. Yes, Zillow. And Airbnb paid me $2,200.
So this is an old hotel that for years wasn't being used for anything. It looked abandoned, but luckily for the owners, it's now being used as one of the city's shelters. Now, the name of this place is the Night Hotel, and back in 2019, it fell on hard times. It wasn't making any money, it had tons of debt, and one of the owners unsuccessfully tried to sell his share of the property. Things were such that nobody wanted anything to do with this place. And in 2020, the whole place ended up shutting down completely. It was empty, there were no guests, but the Asylum Industrial Complex here has grown to such proportions that this building has more value to the city as a shelter than it ever had on the free market as a hotel room. Right now, the city has a contract to pay $230 per room per night, but previously the owners were only able to get around $150 or so per night. And remember, they couldn't rent enough rooms to stay in business, and now the city is overpaying for this place, which makes it look like a total scam. The asylum crisis is the best thing to ever happen to this place. Now look, nobody wants to see families with children sleeping on the streets, but why is the city paying so much for a place nobody wanted? It just looks like corruption. It looks like shady backroom deals are happening all over town. And as it turns out, they are. This hotel down in the financial district, the city pays $190 a night, but rooms here previously were going for around $100 a night. Every hotel the city rents is a bailout of the real estate industry. And it's not just those two hotels. The city's largest shelter, or one of the largest shelters, the Row Hotel, a 1,300-room pre-war hotel, also here in Midtown, the city also appears to be paying a lot of money for, and that place was also bankrupt before it got turned into a shelter. In 2022, that particular facility ended up becoming a shelter, and by 2024, the city has paid $137 million to the owners of that building. Now, there's nothing wrong with the city supporting local businesses, but why are they overpaying? If anything, properties that nobody wants and that can't make money on their own should come at a discount, especially if they're closed and abandoned. And you know, had these places been well run, full of guests, it would have been harder to offer them up as immediate shelters to the city in the first place. And these large government contracts are almost a reward for mismanagement of these properties. And it's almost like this shady little game that the entire hotel industry is now aware of and now getting in on after successfully lobbying the government here. They shut down private Airbnbs. It's like they own this town. But the next facility on our list is even stranger than this one, because just like our illegal warehouse, this next place never should have had people living inside of it. But today it's maxed out. So here we have the Candler building, which is probably the strangest shelter on our list for a variety of reasons. It was actually built in 1912 for the Coca-Cola Company. And as you can see from the sign out front, this is an office. This is not apartments, which means living here would be illegal under normal circumstances. However, things have changed and now it's being used as a shelter. It's also right next to the Wax Museum. And the building is also a landmark property because of its old school, beautiful, distinctive design. But as with most of the places on our list, in 2020, it fell on hard times. And just before it was foreclosed upon, a new investor ended up buying it. And unsurprisingly, the owners were thrilled when the city announced they had plans to turn it into a shelter. And now it houses 800 single men. And that's double the capacity of the gas factory we saw earlier. But again, these are not legal apartments by any stretch of the imagination. And now the owners are getting filthy rich because of the asylum crisis. New York City landlords, who would have thought that they would figure out how to team up with their buddies who run the city to make money off the rest of us and off human suffering. And not only is pretty much every hotel doing this, making way more money than they were previously, late last year, the city signed an agreement with the Hotel Association of New York for 5,000 hotel rooms at a cost of $237 million. And that contract was just extended through August of 2026 for $1.4 billion in profit for the hotels. And that makes it look like this entire thing is just a way for the rich to use their connections to get richer while not actually doing anything to help solve this crisis. Is that what's going on here? And if the city's housing asylum seekers in illegal apartments, is this something private landlords should be able to do as well? Or is it only safe to do this if the city signs a massive contract with one of their buddies who's in real estate? Let me know what you think. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.
Well, Cash Jordan, what I think there's too much corruption that's going on in New York City, and there needs to be an investigation that's going on with maybe foreknowledge of policy, especially foreknowledge of policy, and then purchasing property and understanding those connections, and if there's any possible kickbacks to government officials that are making the decisions. I think this is happening not just in New York, but this is how our federal officials in Congress become multi-millionaires. They have foreknowledge, invest into something that's almost a for sure thing. And if you capitalize on that information, you can be very, very wealthy. Now, that is what we would call insider trading, and which is illegal for the average citizen to do. So why is it that government officials can do it and the average citizen cannot have insider trading? So this needs to be clamped down more. Now, I think there's a larger thing that one can start diving into on this, and that is the city is dying because of democratic policies, not the policies of a flourishing capitalistic society. And you throw in the crisis of 2020 and people moving out, the higher taxation that's taking place, the crime, which is a big part of the reason why there is a flight out of New York City. You add in AI, where the number of office jobs are going to diminish. New York is not sustainable. So the landlords are already having commercial real estate problems. I mean, we hear this in the business news, and maybe I'll do a show about it. But in the business news, commercial real estate, especially in metropolises like New York, are vacant. The number of vacancies, the amount of space that is vacant is at historical levels. So businesses aren't coming to New York. Businesses are truncating. And the city was propped up with, from money from the crisis in 2020. And it was, some of this crisis that was going on in New York was hidden because everyone was working remotely. The crime was somewhat hidden because people were at home working remotely, but it started to flare back up when people were going back to work. So, so there's this element of crime, this element of poor financial policy in New York that's leading to diminished services, garbage pickup, or, less policing of the streets, problems with funding the New York Fire Department to NYFD. You have just the perception, the citizens' perception of the city just decaying and wanting to leave. So there is a flight out of New York. And as the deficits start to increase, that was propped up because of 2020 crisis. There was poor management that was going on pre-crisis in New York, but it was propped up with government funds. Now that's gone away as the 2020 crisis is abated. And this is one of the aftershocks. I talked about the pathology and the aftershocks of the crisis in 2020, but there's also a societal aftershock. And in cities like New York, we're going to see the fissures of poor policy starting to spread apart even more. And you're gonna see these real estate companies starting to be hurting. These REITs. There's REITs for commercial real estate. There's also REITs for residential. But these funds that are tied to commercial real estate, or loans that are tied to commercial real estate, or developers, they're hurting. And so they're going to try to find means to try to stop the bleeding, prevent the bankruptcy, find some sort of government program to try to slow the bleeding down. But these are just failed policies. So let's say you own a building pre-COVID, and you were starting to see that not as many companies were wanting to lease your building, and your vacancy within your building started to go up. Then all of a sudden, the crisis happens in 2020, and people go remote. There's still some people may have been paying their lease for the space, but not using it, and some people just flat out didn't pay. And so these building owners, landlords, who most likely have mortgages, were having problems paying the bank. So not just is it a landlord problem, it's a banking problem. And then, some of these mortgages were wrapped up in some mortgage-backed securities that are tied to commercial bonds. They get downgraded. So there's this cascade, and there's a contagion effect that started to happen during the COVID years. And now we have this aftershock, and you just don't need as much space anymore. On top of, there's a change in buyer behavior because of inflation, because of the decline of the power of the dollar, maybe even the psyche of the consumer has changed. So things are changing in the post-COVID era, this aftershock in economics. And so these people that own these buildings are going to try to find some sort of handout by the government. Government's going to try, and there's multiple reasons. It's not just the immigrant. The illegal immigrant thing is just another reason to try to get funding from the government. Just during COVID, that was a reason to fill a hole that was already starting to happen even pre-COVID. So I just don't think that this is gonna be solved anytime soon. I think if anything, it's going to get worse, especially when there's a truncation of the demand for labor because of the implementation of AI. And even when they were building the World Trade Center, rebuilding it, there was a lot of talk, should they build such a large building for the Freedom Tower? Because even back then, even, right before 2001, commercial real estate, some of these analysts were saying it's overbuilt. You don't really need as many offices, and with high speed internet, you're going to be you can do business remotely. So that talk was already happening in 2001, 2002, 2003. So there was a big discussion: how big should the Freedom Tower be? Now, it ended up being a tall building, but the problem was known going all the way back to 2001. So this problem in commercial real estate has been known for more than 20 years. And, now we're getting another shock, and it's this spiraling where there's the ones that have some power, the ones that have connections will get some sort of money from the government, and it's just going to be a spiraling down and down and down. And it's not really solving the problem. It may solve their particular problem in the short term, that landlord or that bank or that mortgage-backed security or whatever, or short term solve some sort of political crisis that's going on with illegal immigration, but it really doesn't solve the problems long term. So that's my take on it. Now, what I would like to do is play this video that kind of dovetails.
I recently discovered the Wallabout. Let me tell you why it's not your typical stud finder. We all know how most stud finders.
In the last 3 or so.
So this is the wife of Neil Ferguson. And so this will probably dovetail pretty well with the video I did last night. So let's listen here. This is more tied to the issues of Islam in Britain.
We see a lot of violence committed or plotted in the name of Islam, and the people who do this, they are political in their outlook. The government of Saudi Arabia, it's not just the government of the Saudi, but the wealthy oil countries for a long time. And what is now so-called pro-Palestine is actually really anti-Semitism and Jew hatred dressed up as an anti-colonial movement. What are these working class men supposed to do? They're damned if they defend their girls, they're damned if they don't. So they either allow their women to be molested and raped and assaulted, or they defend them and then they're called far right. That's exactly what the Islamists dictated. And then the Labour Party takes that on and says, this is what Labour Party believes. This is a problem we can't ignore anymore. We can't live in denial anymore.
Hello and welcome to the Winston Marshall Show with me, Winston Marshall. I sat down with one of my heroes, Ayaan Hirsi Ali. Islam is back in the public discourse. It is back in the news cycle. Not only have we seen Muslim groups marching through the streets of London every weekend since October 7th, but also now there's a rise in anti-Muslim hate, and MPs are even saying they are worried for their lives and they'll be getting death threats from Islamists. So what's the truth about Islam? We went for a deep dive, and who better to give me that than Ayaan, who from Somalia originally was a Muslim, then joined the Muslim Brotherhood before apostatizing, becoming a new atheist, a prominent new atheist, and apostate twice over. She's now a Christian. So we took a deep dive into Islam, the history of Islam.
She really had some confusion when it comes to her religious convictions, but I do think that she is a prominent thinker of the time that needs to really be listened to. And her perspectives on the crises that we are starting to see in the Middle East and on American campuses, and also in Europe, and especially in Britain, we need to heed her warning.
Know about this religion, this is a good starting point. I wanted to understand myself, but I also wanted to talk about and understand what is the future like? How can we assimilate, integrate? What are the problems with two different groups coming together, and where is there hope and alignment?
Now, I don't know, I haven't watched this video, so we're going to do this on the fly. But what I do know is just that there is this soul root for Esau and Jacob, and this existential battle that is very, very metaphysical, very Kabbalistic, that has been brewing for thousands of years. And there is going to be this ebb and flow between Esau and Jacob. Now, Esau, in the long arc of history, has been on the upswing with the growing caliphate and the Dome of the Rock on the Temple Mount. But as time goes on, Esau is going to be spiraling down in control as Jacob's soul root starts to gain strength. It is known Kabbalistically that Esau and Jacob can never be at equal power. One always is over the other. So it will always ebb and flow, and it's like a fib sequence, a Fibonacci sequence. Now, this sequence, this fib sequence, there's high frequency and low frequency. High frequency fib sequence for the soul root of Jacob and Esau basically means that there are yearly cycles between the power struggle between Esau and Jacob. 6 months of the year, Esau is more strong, and the other 6 months of the year, Jacob is more strong. And so there's this power dynamic of ebb and flow. But then there is also there's a lower frequency fib sequence. And that lower frequency fib sequence is over a longer duration of time, every 7 years or every 50 years or over every 100 years or 150 years, or whatever your time window you want to look at. Is just there is a fib sequence within a fib sequence within a fib sequence, and it starts with a high frequency at a yearly level or even at a monthly level, and then you can extrapolate that over 1,000 years. So we're seeing the upsurge, even though that there are annually ebbs and flows between Jacob and Esau in terms of strength. There is an upsurge in the strength of Jacob. And so just as we saw the decline of the Jewish people with the destruction of the temple and the great diaspora, that was a decline of the power of Jacob and the rise of the power of Esau. But we're seeing actually the decline of now Esau at the decade level and at the 100-year level, to the point where you're going to see the taking down of the Dome of the Rock and the reestablishing of the biblical borders of Israel, and the rebooting of the temple. this is how this is all playing out at a very Kabbalistic metaphysical level that is not in the context of short history. This is deep history. And it's in ebbs and flows with the decline, a long arc of time with a decline of one group of people and a surging of another group of people. And that pendulum will swing back and forth at different frequencies depending on the time period you want to look at. But the big swing we're seeing is in 2,000, 3,000 year cycle.
It's a great privilege to have this job, to speak to heroes like Ayaan. If you want to support me and support the show, all that I ask, kindly, humbly, is you press the subscribe button. If you press the subscribe button, I can bring on more great guests like Ayaan, and we can explore more difficult, taboo topics.
Forget about subscribing to him. Make sure you subscribe to all my channels. I have 3 channels on YouTube: Brighteon, Bitchute, and Rumble. Why should you subscribe to me instead of him? Well, one, I am the one that blew the lid off of the biggest catastrophe that happened in the last 150 years or 125 years. Dealing with the crisis in 2020, and very, very few people was able to cover it with the intensity that I covered, nor with the accuracy that I had or the precedence that I had. So please subscribe to all my channels. I have 3 channels on YouTube: Brighteon, Bitchute, Rumble. I'm heavily censored, and it's time for everyone to start taking stock and following the people that are trailblazers.
That the others are not covering. Without further ado, Ayaan Hirsi.
Hi, I'm Dutch Masters of Carnivore Trading, and I love making money trading stocks.
Thank you for watching the Winston Marshall Show. I guess maybe it'd be helpful to understand what's the spread of these different types of Islam today. So is this a small group of extremists? Like, for example, I remember after the Manchester Arena bombing, the numbers came out of MI5 that there were 22,000 jihadis in Britain. The numbers since suggest that there are even more. So now 22,000 is a lot. That's a small football stadium. Having said that, the numbers are that I think we are something like 4 million Muslims in Britain. So 22,000 out of 4 million is a small percentage of that.
Yes.
It's a small group of that. So let's talk about we'll talk about the West. We'll talk about Europe and Britain. What percentage of Muslims form these different attitudes?
I think that's a very good question. And I think this is a debate we've been having again for decades, and we call it the fringe debate. So when we talk about radical Islam, political Islam, jihadism, Islamism, what fraction of Muslims believe in these ideas and are ready to practice it? And it's very hard to give you specific numbers because we're talking about an idea. So it's very, very difficult to count in that way. What we call radical it's weird because Islamists don't think of themselves as radical anything. They think of themselves as sincere, true believers. And so it's always going to be difficult to quantify the number of people who are radical in their hearts and who will cross the threshold to violence, or who will help us cross the threshold to violence. It's difficult to quantify that. It will forever remain difficult to quantify that. But what is not hard to understand is that it always takes a minority of very determined men to change societies. 11 September 2001 was committed by only 19 men. And it changed America, and it cost a great deal of blood and treasure to combat that. And I still think America has not succeeded in fully combating it. If you look at the 7th of October, it was probably how many people actually committed the act itself?
A few hundred.
A few hundred. And we're on the brink of a third world war. So small groups of men who are determined and who are high on these types of radical ideologies can cause huge changes. And so the fringe argument of how many people are actually committed to this, I think of it as a sideshow. I think what we should look at and is more important is what have this fringe achieved when it comes to changing the hearts and minds of the masses. And I came to the West in the Netherlands in 1992, and it was really a very small group of people whom you would describe as radical Muslims. They were setting up mosques, printing presses, newspapers, etc. They were doing this because they weren't allowed to do these things in their own countries. They came from Egypt, they came from Pakistan, they came from different parts of the Muslim world where they were seen as radical and they were seen as insurrectionists, inspiring people to overthrow governments and the like. And so they were denied freedom of religion and they were denied freedom of speech. They were denied freedom of association, and they came here. They came to Britain, they came to France, they came to different parts of the West, and they established themselves. And a lot of these were, these organizations that I'm talking about were grounded in the Muslim Brotherhood. They were the tentacles of the Muslim Brotherhood. These people who call themselves supporters of Palestine, many of them associated with the Muslim Brotherhood. And it is these early Muslim Brotherhood organizations that established themselves in the West that were able to develop a communication strategy to radicalize Muslim immigrants, whether they came as guest workers or whether they came with their families or later on whether they came as asylum seekers and refugees, it doesn't matter. But they were able to establish a network of mosques, madrasas, Islamic schools, Islamic centers, Islamic neighborhoods, even Islamic, television, satellites. And then of course, later on when the internet came, they adapted even more. And so to a certain degree, what was a very small group of, again, determined men, by getting the opportunity to flourish in a free and open society, achieved an objective that is to persuade hundreds of thousands of Muslims who live in the West to think like them about Islam.
It's worth just unpacking Muslim Brotherhood. I'm conscious of listeners who are maybe new to this topic. Now, I also think it's worth remembering that Hamas are an offshoot of Muslim Brotherhood, certainly ideologically. Can you just explain the Muslim Brotherhood and who they are?
The Muslim Brotherhood was founded in Egypt by a man named Hassan al-Banna, who was a teacher. This was done in the 1920s. And again, he's one of those leaders who answered the question, why did we decline? Why did Islam fall and get colonized? He is the one who answered by saying, we have to go back to the time of Muhammad. And the time of Muhammad he was referring to was the period in Medina. And he was convinced that the way to do it fast was through da'wah, through the call back. And he believed that the faith muscle of the regular Muslim in Egypt had become too lax. And so his first mission was to strengthen the faith of the fellow Muslims. And he started the way he thinks that the prophets started it, by having a small number of believers. That's how you always start. And from there you expand. And they did expand and grow. And the Muslim Brotherhood that Hassan al-Banna established is sprouted not only Hamas, but sprouted Al-Qaeda, ISIS, almost every Sunni radical organization that you can think of. I know a lot about the Muslim Brotherhood because when I lived in Africa as a teenager, it was the Muslim Brotherhood organizations that came into our communities. But as Hassan al-Banna was establishing and preaching and inspiring young Muslims and radicalizing them. Similar organizations and similar thinkers were emerging in India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, different parts of the Middle East. So there was what you call maybe a revival, a reawakening of the Muslim spirit. And then I also want you to think a little bit about Saudi Arabia and the role that Saudi Arabia played for a very, very long time, which was with the oil money that Saudi Arabia had. It financed the spread of Wahhabism, which is Salafism, which are probably the most, culturally speaking, the most radical, traditional, backward-looking forms of Islam. So with that money,
backward-looking, as in to the Medina period of Islam.
Yes, to the Medina period. But I think if you ask me, what is the difference between, say, the Wahhabis and the Muslim Brotherhood? The Muslim Brotherhood were, from the get-go, saw themselves as a political organization, and their objectives was to take over governments initially by force, and then they learned over time that they couldn't do that by force, and then decided to do it through dawah, through infiltration, through various forms of deception, all under the name of dawah. It's very, very difficult to arrest people who are only preaching, or who seem to be only preaching, or who seem to be only collecting charity for the zakat, but who also have political objectives. So the Muslim Brotherhood was, in that sense, a challenge to the government of the day, calling the Egyptian government and other Muslim governments un-Islamic and atheist, or just describing them as non-Muslim. Whereas the Wahhabis, because these Saudi royal families established it in collaboration with the Wahhabi Muslims, they gave the Wahhabis, these monarchs gave them the authority to a certain degree, permission to manage, if you want, the moral framework of the country. And so the Saudi government and the Wahhabi establishment for a long time worked together, for the longest time. And I think maybe the only time that there is some tension between them is with the current crown prince, because the current crown prince wants to modernize Saudi Arabia, and the Wahhabi establishment may not be on board with all of that. And so I think somewhere there's a sense that the Saudis...
Well, I'd go further, because the Saudis, since Al-Qaeda were committing terrorist attacks in Saudi Arabia, the Saudis have actually been some of the best at de-radicalization of Islamists within Islam.
But I don't want to get the Saudis off the hook so easily, because the Saudis invested financially in the radicalization and the Islamization of the whole world. Everywhere you go, every corner of the world, you're going to find some sort of mosque or Islamic center built with Saudi money. And even the Al-Qaeda years, so in Afghanistan in 1979, when I'm
going to kind of bring this into the whole metaphysical perspective with the soul roots. So not only do you have Jacob and Esau as a soul root that comes from Isaac, all right, the father's Isaac, and the twins, Esau and Jacob, are coming from Isaac. There's also the soul root between Isaac and Ishmael. And Ishmael and Isaac come from Abraham. Ishmael is coming from Hagar, the Egyptian woman, and Isaac comes from Sarah. So Ishmael comes from Hagar, and Isaac comes from Sarah. So there's these four soul roots that we're dealing with here. There's the soul root between Isaac and Ishmael, and Jacob and Esau. And those power dynamics are different. One is Jacob and Esau are twins coming from the same mother and father. And the other two, Isaac and Ishmael, are coming from different mothers but the same father. Now, Ishmael is more in tune with Saudi Arabia. But the complexity of Ishmael and Esau is that when eventually Esau's lineage marries into the lineage of Ishmael. So there are, when you're looking at this Muslim kind of construct, you're really dealing with three different soul roots. One soul root is Ishmael, which is pure, the pure soul root of Ishmael, where there's no blending of Esau. There is the pure soul root of Esau, with there's no blending with Ishmael. And then there's a large majority where there's this blending between Esau and Ishmael. And this is why there are different nations that have different compositions of Ishmael or Esau or Jacob. So she is not she's not explaining it the same way I'm explaining it, but she's right that there is this component of Ishmael in the mix here, and that Saudi Arabia is not considered lily white. Now, from a Kabbalistic point of view, for the rise of Jacob, there has to be an alignment between the soul root of Isaac and the soul root of Ishmael working together to kill Esau.
Soviet Union conquered that country, invaded that country. There was a lot of opposition bottom up, but also
within Afghanistan or within
Afghanistan, a lot of fighters, Islamist fighters, one of them Bin Laden, were sent there to fight, and they had the blessing and the endorsement of Saudi Arabia, among others. But I think those governments back then thought that the problem was going to stay there. They never thought that it was going to come back and challenge them back home.
Mm-hmm.
So if you go and look into that period, the relationships between some of these radical Islamist organizations and thinkers, there's a frenemy period when they worked together. And then these Arab governments, not just Saudi Arabia, they started to look at these Islamist groups differently when they realized they're coming for us. And I think that realization was at its most stark during the years of ISIS, when large numbers of Saudi men were leaving to go to Syria and Iraq to establish that nascent Islamic state.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it became plain to the UAE, Kuwait, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, that this is something that they couldn't sustain in their own countries, in their own societies. So the Muslim Brotherhood is banned, and the Wahhabis in Saudi Arabia are to a certain degree tamed. But none of these forces are entirely gone. The irony is that these forces, in particular the Muslim Brotherhood, the Sunni radicals, have found their home in the West, in Britain, in France, in America, and they've been able to do this because of the West being an open society where all these freedoms that they eventually wanted to destroy give them the opportunity to spread their ideas.
What's the story then of?
This is PNN, and I'm going to have to go to a commercial. There are many people that are not getting enough REM sleep. So the best way to rectify that is to go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the Good Night formula that I offer. This Good Night formula will help you get the 3 cycles of REM sleep that you need. And it has tryptophan and melatonin in it. You take it every day if you're not sleeping well. And what you'll do is you'll get a well-rested sleep, and you will be able to detoxify your body. The reason being is that if you are not getting the REM cycle sleep that you need, you're not detoxifying your central nervous system, and there'll be a buildup of toxins if that's not happening. Chronic lack of sleep will increase the risk factors for dementia. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. And if you are having problems with regular sleep, go and get my supplement, which is a tryptophan and melatonin supplement, and it'll allow you to get into the REM cycle sleep. It will consolidate memory because you need REM cycles to consolidate memory. You need the REM sleep to be able to filter toxins out of your system. And you will have that energy and that restfulness to be able to be more productive. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. Link is in the description of this video and all my videos. I also have a great supplement to boost your immune system. You should be taking magnesium and zinc every day to boost up your immune system. If you're not feeling well, take a double dose. And this is part of a boosting of the immune system protocol and part of the anti-aging protocol. Lastly, please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the multivitamin that I offer. This multivitamin is easy to digest, and this will have the cofactors that you need for proper enzymatic activity. By having proper enzymatic activity, you're going to have proper metabolism, and by doing that, you're going to have better cellular function. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and help support your health and help support my work. Back to the news. This is PNN.
Saudi Arabia
Yeah.
through to Britain, like they're coming to Britain now. What's that jump there? Can you paint that for me?
Hi, Mark Barden at Sandy Hook Promise here. When the gunman shot his way into
What's the jump? Okay. The role of Saudi Arabia is as more and more Muslim immigrants came to Europe and to the West. And the Saudi government had the mission, they budgeted for the spread of Islam throughout the world through dawah, peaceful means, quote unquote, peaceful. I'll come back to why I put that in quotation marks.
Why do you put it in quotation marks?
I put it in quotation marks because it's peaceful up to a point. And as you can see now, the intimidation, some of the tactics that are used are far from peaceful. And then later on, we had the eruption.
Well, the thing is, I'm not really sure that it is an orchestrated event. Let me rephrase that. I'm not sure if it's an orchestrated behavior or an emergent behavior. The way I interpret what she's saying, and I could be wrong, but the way I interpret what she's saying is the Saudis kind of orchestrated this unruly activity that's going on in Europe by having more Muslims immigrate into Europe and into society and cause disruption. I take the perspective, and that might be true, that they pushed for immigration into Europe. That might be true, all right? But I'm not so sure that the behavior is fully controlled. And I've been saying this for quite a while, but it's been known Kabbalistically, metaphysically, that the soul root of Ishmael and Esau is animalistic. Now, let me give you a biblical context on why I say this. Ishmael was giving a blessing as they left the tent of Abraham, as his mother and Ishmael left the tent of Abraham, that he would be fruitful. So there's sexual there's a sexual aspect to his soul root because of this fruitfulness. All right. So when that society was asked to accept the precepts of the Torah, they basically said, we can't accept these precepts, these mitzvahs, because of our our focus on being fruitful and multiplying. All right. Now with Esau was a hunter, and very animalistic, from the aspect of killing. So when the precept was brought up to the nation of the nation of Esau, they couldn't accept all the Torah because of their hunting and killing behavior, part of their soul root. So you had these two groups: Ishmael, that was focused on sexuality, and you had Esau, that was more focused on killing, that couldn't accept all of the Torah. So there is this. The point I'm making is that there are these animalistic behaviors that are coming from Islam, because Islam is coming from Ishmael and Esau. All right. So there's these animalistic behaviors that you're seeing, and that doesn't mean that there aren't animalistic behaviors in Christianity or Judaism. There are, and that's why there are these kind of like there's a mixture of soul roots for nations and for individual people. There's some people that come pure with the soul root, like a pure Ishmaelite or a pure soul root from Jacob. But in many cases, there's a little bit of a mix. So this would explain why certain people have, certain tendencies for certain situations, right? But there may be a governing soul root because it has the highest percentage of composition. So with the soul root, just keep in mind that when you're dealing with Ishmael and Esau, there's an animalistic behavior, either for fornication or for killing. And I'm not so sure that Saudi Arabia is able to actually control that animalistic behavior. So what we're seeing in Europe may be an emergent property of the soul root and not really coordinated with any degree of sophistication or of precision.
Terrorism, where on the one hand, some of these Islamist organizations were saying they were condemning, but on the other hand, they were sheltering not only sheltering, but also producing the inspiration to justify the terrorist attacks. So that's why I put it in quotation marks. But the government of Saudi Arabia, it's not just the government of the wealthy oil countries for a long time would invest a lot of money in building the infrastructure, the mosques, the sending of the imams with the very radical ideas to come and preach here. And so they would write the big checks for this spread of Islam and radical Islam in Europe, in America, elsewhere. The radical Islamists in Britain and in America would go to Riyadh and explain to the locals there, this is what we're doing. Can you help us out? And they would come back with a lot of money, and then they were able to build the infrastructure to bring in the Muslim immigrants. The Muslim immigrants of obviously a country like Britain, there are former colonies, so there was that colonial relationship of why Muslims decided to come from the former colonies of Britain to Britain, former colonies of France to France, and so on and so forth. What I'm trying to do is I'm going to try and separate being a Muslim from these countries and from being these political movements. A lot of Muslims from Turkey and Morocco and other Muslim majority countries came to Europe in the end of 1960s, 1970s to find jobs here. Their plan was to go back. They're the guest workers. They didn't go back. Those people who came were not radical anything. They were Muslim. They identified as Muslim, but they weren't radical at all.
Mm.
They became radicalized in the infrastructure of mosques and Islamic centers that were established with Saudi money, among other things. And I'm not saying the money came exclusively from Saudi Arabia.
So they came looking for work. They were looking for a better life, prosperity.
Yes.
And
then yes, exactly. So when you're living in
okay, now let's just assume that that's correct. All right, that they become radicalized and it sparks, it catalyzes the animalistic aspects of their soul group. I can give her that that analysis that these mosques probably were funded by certain Saudi nationalists, and that it goes too far. So there's this really kind of a long arc takeover or some sort of caliphate construction in Europe. I'm not so sure that when you're dealing with animalistic behavior that you can control it. You know, there's an emergent property that happens that it may not necessarily be controlled. Now, the bigger question is why the Saudis feel as though they needed to radicalize their people in Europe. You know, I'm sure that there are lots of different opinions on why this is. Probably the leading opinion at this moment in time is to break down Western society. And, you know, by breaking down Western society, that this would increase the probability of some sort of one world government.
parts of the UK and you're seeking to go to a mosque, well, in the beginning, in some of these countries, I know the Netherlands, Scandinavia, there weren't that many mosques. They want places to go and worship. And so I think what I want to make very clear is those first guest workers that came here and came to Europe, they were not seeking to radicalize Europe. They were not seeking to take over Europe. They were not seeking to spread radical Islam. But once the infrastructure by the Islamists was spread, and again, I want to insist, not all the money came from Saudi Arabia. Some of it was raised locally, but it doesn't matter. The infrastructure is here. Then they were able to tap to this ready population who came to work and then later on as asylum seekers who were seeking a place to go to worship, seeking community, and then radicalize their children. And so it's very interesting to see that first layer of people who came in the 60s are less radical than the kids who were born here into Muslim households.
There's an example of that, which is the Manchester Arena bombing. I think his name was Salman Abedi, and his father came over from Libya and had been fighting Gaddafi. He was actually part of a proscribed jihadi group that was banned in the UK, but he was born and raised in Manchester, and it was the second generation. He was second generation, but he became radicalized and led to the Manchester Arena attack in 2018. Why is it that second generation would be more radical? Is it because they're in those mosques?
Well, it's because when I think where people like Christopher Caldwell come in, but there was a debate going on, it's still going on for a long time, about the integration or assimilation into Western societies of Muslim communities. Why did that not happen? And so on the one hand, you have the parents who had one foot in Europe and one foot home. Remember, the parents only came to work, the men came to work. And the plan was make a little bit of money and then go home. And then they didn't go home and they brought their families in. And so the host countries did not really set up any kind of assimilation programs that was designed to make these communities adopt Western values and Western norms and Western customs. Number one. Number two, Christianity itself as a moral force, mounting missions of Christianizing these newcomers, that never happened. And if it did, it was negligible.
Mm-hmm.
And now here you have these determined Islamist movements that want to set up shop here. And these populations that's a kind of lost. The young men who were born, the young boys who were born into Muslim families, looking for something to do, not really feeling welcomed in among their teenage friends, among their communities, neighborhoods, and so on. I think that was fertile ground for these Islamists to say, we will give you a sense of purpose. And we know your identity because you as a Muslim, this is how to behave. And this is how to be a good Muslim. And that is precisely what happened to me when I was 14, 15 years old, living in a foreign country, not feeling entirely at home we lived in Kenya.
When you went to the Netherlands?
14, 15. No, I didn't. No. When I say it happened to me, this is what the Muslim Brotherhood did when we lived in Kenya, when my family lived in Kenya. So my family, my mother, my grandmother, my brother, sister, and me, we lived in Kenya. My father had left. So this is a female-only household. There is a young boy, my brother, who was 16 years old. And the Muslim Brotherhood, members of the Muslim Brotherhood, when they come preaching, in the beginning, they sound really reasonable. They're taking young people off the streets. My brother had dropped out of school. They bring you into the mosque. They give you a sense of purpose. They tell you the difference between right and wrong. And so that's exactly what they were doing for young men, young boys, and girls to a certain degree who were born in Britain, in France, in Scandinavia, and
so far so good. I mean, that's
so far so good. Yeah. Exactly, so far so good. So it was a win-win for everyone. And so if there are young men standing around in clusters causing trouble, the host society would think, well, now they're going to a mosque and they seem to be fine. At least they're off the streets. And that attitude of, oh, at least they're off the streets. That did not question what is going on inside the mosques. What exactly are they being taught? How are they being brainwashed? And over time, when this started to spill over, because you saw young people who had been to these Muslim schools, Muslim centers, and mosques come out and be very anti-Western, anti-British, anti-Dutch, anti-French, and then from there, start to link themselves with terrorist organizations, carry out terrorist activities. And over again, what we did in the West was address the superficial symptom, the violence. Oh my goodness, we should stop these young people from becoming violent. Oh my goodness, it's because they're excluded, which was true. Oh my goodness, it's because of this or the other. But we never went to the core of the problem.
And I think you're going to see this also in the United States, not just in the Islamic community, but also with the Black community. See, if you create this disenfranchised situation in a society, let's say in Europe, in the UK, or in the United States, then you're going to have politicians that are going to say, okay, let's throw money into it. Let's create these social programs. Let's give them more opportunity through affirmative action or DEI or some sort of policy to try to mitigate this unruliness. But the problem is that when you do that, I think that you're rewarding bad behavior, and it's only going to beget more bad behavior. And you're going to be more forceful in locking down this bad behavior from these groups. Other people, would gravitate to the idea of the oppressor and the oppressed, and you have to punish the oppressor. And that seems to be a gaining theme in the United States. I'm not sure about Europe or the UK, but my concern is that this is going to get worse, and this is going to lead towards an agenda that is trying to get the white person apologetic to the point where there is some sort of wealth transfer to these groups,
which is this infrastructure of Islamist brainwashing.
The all-new GoDaddy Arrow helps you get your business online in minutes with the power of AI. With the perfect name, that has trapped the hearts and minds of many young people.
So you said earlier that it's actually that we don't know the numbers and what percentage of Muslims, let's say in Britain or Europe, believe what exactly. But since October 7th, and I've witnessed this in my city of London, every weekend there are marches. Now, those marches include radical left, Corbynista, Socialist Worker Party types, but also they have Hamas sympathetic groups. I was particularly shocked on October 9th, before Israel had even responded, to meet people who are coming back from the Israel embassy in Kensington on the tube, who were wearing their keffiyeh, who were celebrating, and we saw the footage from in front of the Israeli embassy. Hundreds, if not thousands, of people were there putting off flares, on their knees, praying, Allahu Akbar. It was a day of glory. It was like a total and utter feast, a revelry.
Yeah.
So it seems now, and these marches, and they include many other types. It's not one group. There's many groups, but they have numbered up to hundreds of thousands. So it seems since October 7th.
Yes.
It seems like actually there's quite a lot of people who are Hamas sympathetic. It's difficult to unpack because there's a pro-Palestinian tradition as well, and point of view, and there are legitimate grievances to an extent. I mean, I wouldn't say so for October. You're celebrating on October 9th. I don't think there's anything legitimate there to be celebrating, but the general pro-Palestine conflict.
But I want to stop you there and say you're too young now to have seen, say, what I saw and people my age saw in at least the last 2 decades. After October 7th, what you're describing as the events after October 7th, and how these large numbers of people are coming out of the woodwork with openly radical Islamist slogans, objectives. From the river to the sea is an Islamist slogan. It's the elimination. The goal is to eliminate Israel. That's an Islamist objective. Shia Islamist, Sunni Islamist. It's a global Islamist objective. These were things. The fact that now it's out on the streets and not just a few days, but like openly on the streets, is something that I think takes us back to that fringe versus mainstream, where 20 years ago, every time we had an outburst of Islamist violence or support for Islamist violence, the wise old man would say, it's just a minority, it's just a fringe, it's a small group. I want you to visualize when 9/11/2001 happened. I was in Amsterdam on that exactly the same thing. In exactly that same week, a gaggle of young Moroccan men went out and started celebrating. the Dutch society was shocked. They were stunned by what they had just seen, and they thought, but we thought these young men were Dutch, and we.
This is what I mean. A certain event takes place, and the animalistic instinct of Ishmael and Esau starts to come out. This is the reason why I keep on saying that the only way to solve the problem in the Middle East is to make sure that you destroy Hamas, Hezbollah, and Iran. You have to kill Esau by the sword. That is the only way to stop this.
Understand why, how on earth could this possibly be the case? And very quickly, I was working for the Labour Party think tank at that time. Very quickly, the mainstream political voices, mainstream political leaders said, it's just a fringe, it's just a handful of young men. The next event was the 7/7 bombings. And again, a lot of people went out celebrating, but still, the numbers were so small that cheered on that.
In Amsterdam, they were celebrating.
In various parts of the West. This is all before online, before the internet, so you couldn't actually see. But for those of us who were keen and who were following what was going on, we were pointing and saying, but look, these people are either celebrating it or they're not coming out to say there's something wrong here. And but it's just a handful of people. And every time we were told the numbers are insignificant. And then the cartoon.
This is an important thing that she's bringing up, and I agree with her. Now, I'm going to put it in a different context, not in Solar Roots, but in individual agents' behavior and the emergence of behavior within a society. Now, imagine you have a bunch of marbles, and they're mixed up in a container, and they're 50-50. Okay. And you have white balls and black balls in this container, these marbles. Now, if you mix it very well, and that mixing is more heterogeneous, then you're going to have more kind of stability within that social system, because each agent is working together, and there's not too much of white balls with just white balls and black, marbles with black marbles, right? But if you have a society that starts to segregate into their own different agents, in this case, the white balls segregate to one side of the container and the black balls segregate to another side of the container, you'll get its different social dynamic. Now, you see this in trading, financial markets, where let's say the white balls are the buyers and the black balls are the sellers. When it's mixed very well, then you have a stable trading environment. But once you have too many buyers communicating or segregating with each other, you're going to have markets that are going to be moving in an upward direction, and a bubble is emerging. And then as that's happening, there's an accumulation of black balls that are segregating, and those will eventually start trying to short the market. And now the bubble's starting to burst. Now, there is this dynamic over time as the white balls are coalescing. And then eventually the black balls, start to coalesce. So there's this time-dependent dynamic of the forming of a bubble and the bursting of a financial bubble. You will see the same dynamic with the Islam, this Islamic infiltration, where you're going to have too many people in a segregated environment where a certain event takes place and a certain behavior starts to emerge. Now that behavior, I contend, is, dealing with this animalistic soul root. So composition of the society, not just in absolute terms, but in relative terms, is really important. You can have a society that in absolute terms is a certain number of people for an ethnicity or a religion. But if it's well mixed within the society, you're not going to have the same dynamic as a society that is segregated. So just keep that in mind, that there is this power dynamic that emerges depending on the heterogeneous or the homogeneous mixing of a society.
The cartoons in Denmark, and there you had large numbers of men come out and demonstrate in front of the Danish embassy and I think the French embassy, and the slogans those people were carrying around. We had those who were against the prophets, and one day we will take over Europe and all of these things. They was dismissed as the rantings of bearded madmen, and they were bearded, but I don't think they were mad. Then, if you keep on, you remember the attacks in Bataclan. You remember the rise of ISIS, and you remember just the sheer number of people who left Western societies and who were trying to sneak into ISIS. But every time the mainstream media, mainstream politicians would say it's just a minority, the whole thing was presented as something, demographically speaking, that was manageable.
Well, I think part of the reason why the mainstream media was saying it was that they didn't want to rock the apple cart, because one, they have advertising dollars that they depend on. Some of these advertising dollars are coming from companies that are owned by sovereign wealth funds from Saudi Arabia. But there's also the kind of the geopolitical component, that, there's, some American policies aligned with Saudi Arabia. So, mainstream news outlets like CNN, obviously have some sort of connection with the Pentagon and the CIA. So, they have to toe a certain line. So I think that it's a complex issue to dive into, but the mainstream media is captured either financially or politically in many ways, and this might be the reason why they were downplaying it.
It's shocking, but it's manageable. We can do this. And I think what you're describing, what the 7th of October is showing us once again, is this is a persistent problem. It's becoming structural. Demographically speaking, this is huge. And in a matter of time, if this carries on, and it will carry on, you see more and more confidence in how these Islamists think that they have a pathway to taking over parts of Western society. They have been able to take over parts of neighborhoods. They have been able to unsettle political parties by threatening to vote differently if they didn't get what they want, forcing political parties to adopt positions that they actually don't believe in. And then what you're describing about Britain now, where you say the MPs can't vote on a resolution with their conscience because they're too terrified of what might happen outside. So I think now you can no longer argue that this is a fringe problem that is manageable, that we can just ignore. I think you can't do that anymore. Not only that, throughout these last 20 years, with all of these events that I'm describing, there was this constant anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish verbal violence, psychological violence, and then actual physical violence. If you look at, obviously everybody will say, well, anti-Semitism is baked into the European cake. I mean, we've had anti-Semitism in Europe and Jew hatred in Europe for so long. That is what erupted in the Holocaust. All of that is true. But right after the Holocaust, we came out and said, never again. And that was the case until radical Islam, political Islam came here. And what is now so-called pro-Palestine is actually really anti-Semitism and Jew hatred dressed up as an anti-colonial.
So this vector, this force vector that's going against, quote, the oppressors, right? There's two force vectors. One is this Islamic takeover or this caliphate that's starting to build up. And then the other is this BLM movement. Yeah, but both of them are working together in loose confederation to try to demonize Western culture, and specifically white males, white females, Christianity, and Judaism, and put them into the oppressor category. So this is not, this kind of explains my observation, what was going on at Harvard, that this whole Palestinian rallies and Israeli protesting that was going on campus at Harvard right after October 7th also had this element of BLM. The Black Lives Matter movement and this whole reparation movement is to create an additional divide within society, to try to demonize, in their mind, the oppressors of systemic racism and systemic colonialism, and all, you know, and it turned the Western society into some sort of apologetic civilization where they could get people into higher positions in government that push for some sort of reparations and weaken the society to allow for a caliphate to emerge. Now, the strange thing here is that they are recruiting people within the movement, within the BLM movement, within the anti-Israeli movement, and into this whole Islamic movement that aren't Black. Many of them are white, impressionable ultra liberals. So these ultra liberal white students are going to be eventually considered the oppressor, even though they are fighting for reparations for the whole BLM movement. So, you know, these ultra liberal white students don't realize that they are going to be paying in the end of, through the policies that they're trying to institute. Now, also take it from the perspective of the force vector from this Islamic takeover. The force vector, you have ultra liberals trying to promote Palestine and, some sort of living peacefully with the soul root of Esau and Ishmael. But some of these impressionable students don't realize that once the caliphate takes hold, the religion is against them, such as their, homosexuality practices, or, their feministic ideals. Those are not, feminism and homosexuality are not acceptable in Islamic faith. So these ultra liberals don't realize that they are promoting, many of them are promoting policies for the BLM movement or for this Islam takeover that will eventually those movements will go after these students, these impressionable students that are pushing these agendas. It's only going to be a small percentage of the people that are going to be benefiting from these policies if they take root and are accepted in society. And the only way they're going to be taking root and accepted in society is if Western society becomes apologetic. Now, this is the reason why it's so important that Western society should not be apologetic. If we want a productive society and a peaceful society, we must push back on these policies.
How intrinsic is anti-Semitism to Islam? Is it in the same way that anti-Semitism was baked in the cake in Europe, to use your language? Is there a similar, could you say the same about Islam, or is it the extremist of Islam?
So I thought this girl was working out like crazy, but she wasn't. I met her yesterday at the gym and I asked her, how do you look so great?
So again, I'm just not going to use the word extremist because I think the word extremist, moderates, these words, they don't really illuminate anything. In fact, if anything, they obfuscate. So it's better to talk about, say, the Medina Muslims and the Mecca Muslims. And so when I was growing up, I first of all never seen a Jewish person before, so the proximity matters, doesn't it? And so a lot of Muslims, if they are not acquainted with Islamism, I think they just think, there are people there who live in Palestine. They are the victims of Israel and the Jews, and therefore I hate the Jews, or the Jews are wrong, or the Jews are bad, or the Jews are anti-Islamic. But it is mild compared to the organized action to seek to eliminate Israel or all Jews from the face of the earth. And that is Islamist. And that is the objective. I mean, in 1979, Ayatollah Khomeini, who is the Shia radical, he came to power in Iran. And one of his key priorities, if not his key priority, was to eliminate the state of Israel. So that's the elimination of Israel is baked into the Islamist cake. So the anti-Jewish hatred we're seeing in Europe, in America right now, is Islamist driven mainly. That is not to say that the far right anti-Semitism is gone, it's not. And the anti-Semitism on the left is not gone. In fact, what's interesting is the anti-Semitism on the left is actually piggybacking now on the Islamist-driven anti-Semitism. And so all of these weird forces are now coming out and combining to make it mainstream, to make it legitimate to hate the Jews.
You've written a lot about, over the last few years, about wokeism, woke progressivism. It's very curious to see progressives defending Islamism. Islamism, by your definition in this conversation, certainly, like the destruction of Israel. Why is it, do you think, that
This is PNN and I have to do a commercial. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the structural nano silver gel. This will help to neutralize pathogens. It stays active for 5 hours. You can put it on your hands, around your mouth, around your nose, around your ears and your eyes, lightly coat your nostrils, and it will neutralize pathogens. You can also use it on your skin, on a cut, an abrasion, minor burn. It'll help to heal it quicker. You can also apply it at night on your skin and exfoliate in the morning, and you'll notice that your skin will be improving. So it has a dual purpose. It is a skincare product, but it is also a product that you use to help neutralize pathogens. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the great structural nano silver products that I have. I also have structural nano silver soaps. So please go to the store. I have a charcoal tea tree and lavender, oatmeal spice, and peppermint. So please go to the store and get the high quality soaps that I have that helps to neutralize pathogens, and help support my work. I have a unique perspective on certain things that are happening either in the scientific front or the political front, or even on the historical front. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and help support my work and improve your health. This is PNN.
I've actually had a conversation with James Lindsay about this, and he calls it the Red Green Alliance, and he has some theories about why is it that those two have found each other, rather unlikely bedfellows. How is it that progressives are defending what is a highly conservative, to put it mildly, ideology?
Yeah. So James Lindsay, whom I admire for his work and his honesty about just really the work he has done with Helen Pluckrose, Peter Boghossian, they've done, I think, all the work that needs to be done on wokeism and why they're doing this. But the reasoning that the woke's social justice, capital S, capital J, and their grievance against the structures of Western society, neo-Marxist, cultural Marxists, they moved away from the proletariat, from the haves and the have-nots, and trying to get things for the have-nots. It seems that they've moved away from that, and they've now come to this postmodernist romantic conclusion that the only way to achieve justice is to decolonize, to bring down all the structures, start off with a blank slate. And of course, that tells you that they have this shared agenda with the radical Islamists who also want to bring down the structures. Their objective is different, but the language they use is similar. And you can see why, ironically, the local Marxists in what we call Iran today allied themselves against the Shah of Iran with the Islamists led by Ayatollah Khomeini back in the day. And when the Islamists came to power, the first thing that they did was to disempower the Marxists. They exiled them, they threw them into prison, they denied them positions of power, they slaughtered them. And so it's very interesting now to see this unfold in the West, especially with records like that. And this didn't just happen in Iran. It happened everywhere where the Islamists got the upper hand. They immediately rid themselves of their secular, radical, they could be Marxist or Ba'athist wings. And so these are dynamics where they really understand one another in Arab countries. But here, as I think James Lindsay will point out, the people seeking to decolonize in the name of, saving Palestine or liberating Palestine. The word liberation is used now these days in very interesting ways. But they see people of color, they see people who are formerly colonized by the white male heterosexual. They also have, there's a great deal of literature in how they seek to achieve justice through violence. And you can see, I've written a piece for the Wall Street Journal a year or two ago on the similarities that I see between the Islamists and the woke. But I just have to repeat the irony of seeing slogans like "Queers for Palestine." And yeah.
So back to my country, Britain.
Yeah.
As I've said earlier, there's about 4 million Muslims. How many of you don't like using the moderate extreme, let's say Medina, Mecca Muslims, but they are here and they are British, and many of them have been here for generations. You've mentioned earlier about assimilation and integration. I want to ask about this because I want to understand this, because this seems crucial to our future. Is that how is it that we can be unified as a nation with different beliefs? So I guess the first basic question is Islam compatible with British values?
Muslims who seek to define their faith as something personal and unique to themselves can make their Islam compatible with, and we've seen that. I want to name one example: the Aga Khan communities all over, but I'm sure they're in Britain too. The way they define Islam and the way they live and practice Islam is completely compatible with Western life. The radical Islamist Muslim Brotherhood agenda is not. It seeks to destroy our values, not only in Britain, but everywhere. And so the short answer to your question is the radical Islamist agenda is not compatible with British values, the little I know of British values.
So then for those more Mecca style Muslims, what and how do we, in turn, practically speaking, in terms of policy, like how can we help integration? How can we're told constantly that diversity is our greatest strength. I happen to believe that unity is our greatest strength. And I'm trying to find what is it that's going to unify us so that we can prosper together as a nation.
I think courage. I think our leaders have to have the courage to come together and admit that we failed, and that when the problem was much smaller, 20 years ago, even 30 years ago, there were things that we should have done that we didn't do. And that now, as time goes by, it becomes more urgent that we do these things. And why does it need courage? Because you are going to have to come to the conclusion that you have to take this infrastructure away from the Islamists that's used to radicalize communities.
So the mosques,
schools, Islamic centers, etc. I mean, I don't care about the structures. The buildings themselves can stay, but
who's running them?
It's the people who run them, and it is what those people who run them have to say. That is, it takes a great deal of courage, but I think sooner or later you have to come to that conclusion, and the sooner the better, because as you can see, this is a problem that's only expanding. And when I'll just step back a little.
Well, to do that, we would actually have to categorize their institutions as terrorist, and then because it's terrorist, then they would, have to be removed from power, and therefore you would be secularizing these institutions. But there would be such a backlash that there's going to be instability within those societies, and there's going to be riots now.
Take you back to when I was in the Netherlands and I came into parliament and I was asked what I thought, and I went and found, I think, some of the most serious thinkers in the Netherlands who were genuinely interested in welcoming and assimilating the Muslims that we had in Holland. And the conclusions we reached is to assimilate into a society that is, I'll use a different word, to acculturate. You have to become part of the story of that society. You have to understand its history. You want to become a part of its destiny. And that happened.
That will never happen because of the innate soul root of Ishmael and Esau. There's always going to be this is a false safety. There's always going to be a pendulum that is going to swing between Esau and Jacob, or Islam and Western society. All right. And if Islam is in the upswing, then Western society is going to be in the downswing. It's going to be inversely related. You're not going to be able to inculcate these soul roots because of the very nature of their absolutism or their radicalization or the ability for them to be radicalized. Now societies may feel somewhat safe with some of these individuals in their society that have the soul root of Esau or Jacob. I'm sorry, Esau or Ishmael. But that's because they had small percentage of the population, and they weren't able to coalesce to have rioting capability. Now you have rioting capability within the society because of this major influx of immigration into Europe and into the UK. So it's problematic. I see this as this can only. I don't think this can be done peacefully. I think that it can only be rectified through kinetic means.
That acculturation happens through school, through all the meaning making and the knowledge producing institutions, and we wanted to welcome them into those. But if you establish an alternative parallel meaning making and knowledge producing infrastructure with a completely different objective that is totally hostile to the host society, then you don't achieve that acculturation objective. And so to be brave enough, if you have the courage, you're going to say, we're not going to allow that infrastructure. And we're not there. We've allowed that infrastructure in all of these countries, and we've seen what it has wrought. And now we're in the hard position, instead of saying, no, you can't do this, which was the case 30 years ago or 20 years ago. Now we're in a place where we're saying, we've allowed you to do this, but we're taking it away from you, which is a much harder position to be in.
I love that idea of acculturation, and it's a very positive attitude. But practically speaking, thinking this through, to repeat, there are 4 million Muslims in Britain.
Yeah.
So if you mean to change the schooling systems of Muslim schools, going into the mosque, and I just cannot picture how that will actually happen.
You have to also understand that of the 4 million Muslims, not all of them are Islamists. In fact, many of them hate the Islamists because they frustrate their life. They make them feel like they're pariahs. They don't want terrorists. They don't want to raise terrorist children, and they don't hate the society they are in. So I think there is going to be some collaboration to be done, but that is to find the Muslims who don't want to be a part of any of this. But it is, sooner or later, you're going to have to reverse that process. If you don't reverse that process, and it goes on the way it goes on, demographically speaking, through immigration, through birth rates, and through this determined infrastructure that's constantly churning out this brainwashing of young people and really capturing the hearts and minds of every young Muslim, you're going to find yourself in what one thinker described as the former Yugoslavia, the Balkan states. You're going to see a Balkanization. The ghettoization is forming. Then it's going to be a Balkanization, and what we call social cohesion, that is now already fraught. I think it's going to be eroded even more. I think you're going to have distrust of societies, and then you're going to have riots that are now underway in Ireland, constantly underway in France.
The problem with finding these.
So because this video is somewhat long, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a part 2 of this discussion that's going on, and then also go in with another video that's dealing with IQs of different nationalities in the United States. So please make sure you subscribe to all my channels. I have 3 channels on YouTube, Brighteon, Bitchute, and Rumble. And also please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the health supplements, the ebooks. And I have this great new product. It's a lecture series on pulmonology. I have 22 lectures with PDF, downloadable PDFs of the slide deck for each of the lectures. You pay on the store $50, and you get a password that's emailed to you, a unique password that allows you to access the PDFs and the lectures. I have 22 lectures for the pulmonology module, and it's a great way to learn about the pulmonary system, different diseases dealing with the pulmonary system, how to do certain types of examinations, some testing, some treatment for certain types of diseases, the reading of x-rays and CT scans. So you get to learn a lot of information for $50. Why should someone purchase this type of product? One, it will reduce the power imbalance between you and your physician, so you are more informed about how the human body works. Number two is that it's challenging, and it'll help to learn. You'll be learning something, and you're challenging your brain. And the third thing is that you'll become a discerned citizen, a citizen that has the ability to listen to the mainstream media and be able to see what is correct and incorrect in how they phrase certain things, and understand what other agencies in the government are doing in terms of health and wellness. So, and there are published papers that come out, and to be able to read those published papers and to have your own discerning opinion. I think the big lesson learned from 2020 crisis was that we had a large part of the population that did not have a medical or scientific background to be able to be a more discerning citizen. So a citizen scientist is in order here. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. The links are in the description. Get the ebooks, get the supplements and the deodorants, and also purchase the anti-aging boxes, follow my anti-aging protocol, and purchase the pulmonology lecture series for $50. You will learn a lot, and it's a great way to challenge your mind and to get more skills, get more education, to be able to be more discerning on what's going on. There will be another crisis that will emerge. And there will be incidences where there's going to be a flare up of certain types of pathogens. And you want to be able to navigate for your family and for your own health and what you need to do, but not just that, on why you need to do it. You'll understand the pathophysiology of what is going on. So you are a more informed citizen. And this knowledge you can take to your doctor and say, I am concerned about such and such because of this, this, and this. If you have more knowledge, you are going to reduce the power imbalance between the physician and the patient. And when you do that, you will be more in charge. So please go to my store and purchase the pulmonology module and become an informed citizen. So thank you for listening and watching. I will do a part 2 of this and release it. So have a nice day.